San Bernardino County. Me and my family decided to go fishing at Silverwood Lake, and we got there around 1:30 p.m. I was fishing by the lake, and after a while of not catching anything, I decided to put a second rod about 100 feet away from the first one. I went back to my first, and around 3 to 4 p.m., I decided to check on the second rod. My 3 and 4-year-old daughters were following me, so I sent them back with my wife. I thought they had gone back, so I kept on walking towards the second rod. All of a sudden, I heard leaves crunching to my left. About 30 feet away from me, I saw an ape-like creature with light brown hair. It had long arms that were swinging while it ran. It was also crouching a little to the front. I stood there in shock, frozen for a while, and realized my 4-year-old daughter was behind me, running back to my wife yelling, "Mom! Mom! There's a big animal." Then I went back to Mew's wife and told her what I saw. What amazed me was the speed at which it was running. San Bernardino County. I was living in Southern California at the time. I was 12 years old and was invited by my friend's family to stay at a cabin with them at Big Bear Lake for the weekend. We arrived before noon that Friday, unloaded the Suburban, and helped my friend's dad take down the plywood from the windows before heading off to explore the woods and rock formations around the cabin. After dinner, we discussed the next day's activities and went to bed. The cabin looked like it had been there a while. Sometime during the night, I had to go to the bathroom, and I knew the toilet wasn't working. I got up, walked through the kitchen, and turned on the light before going outside. I left the door open so the light would shine through, and I closed the screen door behind me. I didn't want to go right there by the door, so I walked over to the tree line on the other side of the parking area and was reaching down to start when I felt really scared. I looked over to my right, and about 20 feet away, something was looking at me over a bush. It was between 2 large trees and standing behind a bush, parting the top of the bush with its hands, looking right at me. All I could see was the upper chest, head, arms, and hands. I stood there looking back for 15 to 20 seconds, and then I just bolted for the cabin. I didn't look back, because I didn't want to. I ran up the steps and dove through the screen door, landing on the living room floor. I then reached back and slammed the door. Before my friend's father came into the room, I crawled to the other side of the room next to the couch. He walked over to me and asked what was wrong. I looked up at him, and I just lost it. I was crying and shaking so much I couldn't speak. By that time, my friend and his mother were there, and she helped calm me down a bit. I told them I went outside to go to the bathroom, and something was standing there looking at me. They asked me if it was a person. I said no. It was huge, black, and very tall. His father asked, "Was it a bear?" I said no. Bears don't have hands. My friend's father went and got his flashlight. He then walked over to the door and opened it. He looked at the screen door and looked back at me. "What happened to the screen?" I said I left the door open for some light and jumped through it when I ran back into the cabin. He looked back at the screen door for a second, and then shut the door. My friend's mother said no one goes outside until the morning when it is light out. We stayed up for a while, maybe an hour or so, before going back to bed. In the morning, I showed my friend's father where I was standing and the spot where it was standing. He looked at the ground a little and the area nearby, but found nothing. He just said it was probably a bear. I told him it was not a bear because its face was flat and its hands had long fingers. He said we should stay close to the cabin the rest of the weekend and not go wandering around. Nothing else happened the rest of the weekend. The description of the face was very ape-like, and the nose area was different, not as pronounced, just smaller, with hair all over except the mouth area and eyes. I didn't see any eye shine at all, and the head was pointed. The upper chest was massive, very wide and powerful looking. I noticed the hands first when I looked over at it that night. The hands were long with some hair, but not as much as the rest of them. I did see a thumb on the left hand when it was parting the top of the bush. The bush was taller than me at the time. I was 5 feet 7 inches. I didn't smell or hear anything. When we got back home, my parents were told what happened, and that I was pretty shaken up about it, and that I didn't sleep much over the weekend. I didn't know what I saw until later, when I was in our local Woolworths looking at state boards, and as I passed the magazine racks, there on the cover was a picture of Bigfoot from the Patterson film. I bought the magazine, and I now show it to my friends and family. San Diego County. We went camping for a couple nights near Julian, CA, and a location just a couple miles south of town, adjacent to Highway 79. We arrived on a Friday night and stayed through Sunday afternoon. We were sharing a tent trailer with friends. Both mornings before dawn, I walked my wife over to the nearby porta potty/restroom. Both nights were clear and quite dark with partial moonlight, but the area has a lot of trees, so there are shadows even though you can see well enough to walk over to the restrooms without a flashlight. The first morning, we walked over to the bathroom without incident, and it's very quiet there, especially in the evenings. The second morning, probably about 0540, as I waited for my wife, I very clearly heard a tree knock. It came from the north of our location. When my wife came out of the restroom, I told her what I heard and asked her if she heard it too. She did not. We walked back to the tent trailer and got back into bed as the sun was not rising until closer to 0700. We were both awake about 15 minutes later when we heard a single whoop sound, this time from a bit to the east. Right after the whoop sound was heard, there were blue jays in the trees around us that went nuts, making all kinds of noise for about 20 seconds, then all was quiet again. A bit later, still before dark, I got up and kindled a fire a bit outside and decided to take my vehicle up the road to drop some trash off near the campground office. Another friend from a second tent trailer, also camping with us, was up at this time. I told her about the tree knock and whoop that was heard. When I returned from the quick errand to the trash bin, she told me she had also heard a tree knock, but this time it was to our west. A few minutes later, I heard two more whoops, one from the southeast and one a couple minutes after that, from the south. These were not coyotes yipping. I'm not sure what else to say about it, but it was interesting. Mono Lake. I went to Mono Lake with my father early in the morning to capture some long exposure photos of the sunrise. We arrived at the lake around 6 a.m. right at golden hour. When we got to the parking lot, well, there was one other car parked in the lot. After grabbing my photography gear, camera bag and tripod, we began walking down the path towards the lake. I was looking off to my right-hand side and clearly saw something that was all black and bipedal walking parallel with me about 15 yards away. It ducked behind a small tufa as I was watching it walk. I told my dad that I saw something walking on 2 feet, and he said that he saw something moving over in that direction as well. I knew that there was a person in the same area as us since there was a car parked in the lot when we arrived, so there was still a possibility that what I saw was a person dressed in all black, although it would be strange for a person to be walking off the path in the area where I saw this thing since we were still away from the lake where all of the points of interest are. My dad and I continued to walk towards the lake to shoot the sunrise. As we approached the lake, there was another photographer who had their camera mounted on their tripod and was taking photos. At this point, I realized that what I saw walking was not a person since the owner of the car who was parked when we arrived had just been accounted for. I did not think I would ever experience something like this in my lifetime. I wish I had gone to the area where I saw it and looked for some evidence or footprints, but I was too scared to stray off the path since it was able to disappear in the brush/tufas so easily. Los Angeles County. I left my parents' house on my way back to Noslemore, CA. As my buddy and I were heading towards Gorman on 138 Lancaster Road, between 200th Street West and 280th Street West, we both saw something to our right running through the desert. It had to have been 7 feet tall, with thin and long stringy hair hanging off its body. With a long stride and long arms, he appeared to have a long stride. I didn't believe what I saw. About a minute later, my buddy asked if I had seen something. I said yes. He then described exactly what he saw. It was dark and it really spooked us. We took off quickly. To this day, I know I saw something, and it puts a chill down both our spines when we talk about it. Friends and family think I'm crazy. I know what I saw. Being much older now, I wish I had gone back for proof, footprints or something. Kern County, California. I was about 14 years old and was riding a horse on a ranch that my family owned. The ranch location is Tehachapi, California. I was on a trail going towards the edge of the forest, still on our property. When I reached the edge of the forest, there was a dead cow. It had been dead for some time now because it was mostly just bones. When I looked around, I was still on my horse. That's when I saw Bigfoot. He was really tall, black and so human-like. He looked at me, but was not scared. I said to myself, that's Bigfoot. Bigfoot had one hand and one arm leaning against a giant tree, and he looked to be both man and ape. Bigfoot looked right at me, and we both just looked at each other. I was so scared that I turned around and went back to the ranch. I've blocked this out of my mind for many years, I believe from being scared to death. I spoke to my dad about the ranch. Did we still own 10,000 acres and the ranch? He said no and is now 90 years old. I asked him, did anybody ever say they saw Bigfoot? He said yes. I could take you to the spot where I saw him, and I'm sure someone who lives in that area would say they have seen him also. Why? Because he is there. He is out there living. This happened 28 years ago, But I remember it very clearly now for some reason, and how he looked at me. Riverside County. I was going back to close shop at approximately 10 p.m. in the northern desert above Palm Springs, CA, and saw a huge light tan-colored biped with soft glowing hair. Because I was in a small VW Bug with a light pointing down into the street upon leaving the driveway facing out into the desert. I froze there with my dim headlight on it, and it too froze there completely still. I flashed my worthless high beams at it, and it took 2 giant steps backwards and then 1 to my left, its right, and it was gone into the dark. I was overcome with severe fear, panic, and anxiety and had to return home again. I was armed with .45 at the time and was still worried that if I shot it I would be in real trouble. It was enormous, with a chest the size of a refrigerator, arms that hung below the knees and were still huge. I did not speak with anyone about it right away because whoever heard of a desert Bigfoot, but later I found out that all the locals call him Yucca Man, Riverside County. I was camping with my wife and friends from the 23rd to the 24th of August, 2008. My wife and I shared a campsite with our friends, and they shared a campsite with 2 tents on a second campsite about 50 feet away from us. I had drank no alcohol before going to bed, so I slept fairly lightly. I awoke at 4:50 a.m. Just as I awoke, I heard a loud sound that seemed to me to be someone hitting a tree trunk with a large branch. I lifted my head in the tent and looked around for any light sources and saw none. I also heard no voices. I was intrigued enough to continue listening. Our closest neighbor had a dachshund, and the next closest had 2 larger dogs that were tied up outside their tent. Once I heard the first loud sound, the outside dogs started moving around, but didn't bark. They made some moaning sounds, but that's all. From what I could tell as far as sounds, something or someone walked through the campground from lower to higher through a ravine. It had very heavy footsteps. It sounded like it broke fairly large branches on the ground. Once it crossed the campground's asphalt, the neighboring dogs started crying, whimpering, and moaning. I then heard what sounded like a rock or something similar being thrown against a tree near our tent and falling to the ground. Right at the crescendo of the crunching branches, I decided to get up and unzip our tent window. At the same time, the tent of the owners of the dogs opened and a woman came out and grabbed the dogs to quiet them down. That was the last I heard of the crunching footstep sounds. Also, there had been crickets making noise all night until this event. Once this started, the cricket noise was reduced to only crickets at a great distance. By the end of the incident, there were no more forest sounds at all. The next morning, we walked over to the ravine that I thought I had heard the biped walking through and found no footprints due to the extremely dry ground. I spoke to a family right next to the ravine, and they had heard nothing that night, but had heard footsteps the night before. The husband/father is a hunter and told me that he had seen bears 2 or 3 times in the past in those mountains, but had never seen them down in the campgrounds in that area. Mountain lions are fairly common in those mountains, but what I heard seemed to be heavier than a mountain lion. Plus, whatever animal I heard sounded like it had 2 feet as opposed to 4. I later found out that one of our friends had heard footsteps around his tent at about 4 a.m. He thought it was our other 2 friends camping with us, playing a joke on him. Imperial County. I was driving back from Blythe and it was about 10 p.m. I slowed my semi down going through the mountains when I came to a pull out, and I got out to relieve myself. While I was standing on the passenger side of my truck, I heard the sound of rocks falling. When I looked up, I saw something that I can't describe in words. It ran 20 yards in front of my truck, heading east, and I got back in my truck and drove away. I've never told anybody about this, not even my wife, because I thought people would think I was crazy. I will never drive that highway again at night. What I saw was about 7 or 8 feet tall, grayish-brown, and what scared me the most was the grunt it made when it crossed the highway. Inyo County. Please see the following included sections for elaboration of details. 2 of us were driving home from a day of skiing at Mammoth Mountain, California. The road was a 2-lane highway opposite directions, with a soft dirt shoulder. We were in an open convertible, because the skis did not fit otherwise. The moon was full, the lighting was unobscured, and the visibility was excellent, near daylight. In the distance, well beyond the reach of the high-beamed headlights, 2 of us could see a very large and completely out of place thing running ahead of our approaching car. It was on the other side of the road. We slowed to 50, 40, and 30 miles per hour. We were now in our headlights, running on the dirt shoulder, obviously unaware of our approaching auto. There it was, Bigfoot. At its closest point, we were 10 unobstructed feet from it, eye to eye. Also noticed, perhaps the most burnt in recollection of the sighting was the look of absolute surprise on the creature. We were close enough to see, and almost sense how very startled he was by us being suddenly eye to eye with us. This was not some lower animal response. This was an intelligent human like, "Oh crap, you saw me, and where did you come from?" look of surprise, as it stared at us just prior to running down and off the elevated highway. The creature was significantly larger than even the largest of human beings. No way this was a human being dressed in costume as Bigfoot. While we were sitting in an auto, I can still say, with a high degree of accuracy, that the creature was 8 to 9 feet tall. The body mass was stout, thick in the chest and trunk, and very muscular. Even though 90% of the hair was covered, you could see the outline of significant muscle definition and mass. This is much better than a guess. It weighed upwards of 500 to 600 pounds. I can remember many details about the creature: hair 90%, dirty skin tone, where there was leathery skin 10%, arm length, relative appendage size, and the biometrics of the approximate 15 miles per hour running gait. Even the wide-eyed look due to surprise on its face. I am quite certain that the other witness will have an equally vivid recollection.